Welcome to Lore Evolution, the show where we examine the production history of our favourite factions, characters and technologies from the realm of science fiction and fantasy. Today we journey to the Star Trek universe to talk about everyone's favourite space capitalists, the Ferengi. The Ferengi made their debut in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode The Last Outpost. They were created and developed by Gene Roddenberry and Herbert J. Wright, and intended to be the primary Federation antagonists of the show. Seeing as how hostilities had died down with the Klingons, TNG needed a new recurring bad guy faction to challenge the Enterprise. While this faction would ultimately end up being the Romulans, the Ferengi were originally created for this purpose. The name of the Ferengi was derived from the Arabic word Farangi, which referred to European foreigners. The initial design for the species was created by illustrator Andrew Probert, and then refined by makeup artist Andrew Westmore. While the greed element of the Ferengi was there from the beginning, Herbert J. Wright conceptualized their culture a little differently. The Federation was meant to be depicted as vast numbers of people working together for a common good, and so the Ferengi, being the new antagonists, were created to be the exact opposite, scheming and cunning, only out for their own personal gain, which included their own wealth. They were intended to be vicious and ruthless, no sense of honour. Also, apparently Gene Roddenberry had a bit of an obsession with Ferengi sex life, which Wright found kind of odd. One of the first Ferengi, Latek, was portrayed by none other than Armin Shimmerman, who of course we'll be discussing later in the video. The part came his way due to his short stature, which was required for the Ferengi roles. Having refined the look and culture of the Ferengi, they made their debut in The Last Outpost, and pretty much everyone hated them. The general feeling among the writing staff was that they were just rubbish as villains. Eventual DS9 showrunner Ira Steven Behr said they were a disaster. Will Wheaton called them the lamest aliens in all of Star Trek, and Maurice Hurley said they were a complete waste of time, goofy and terrible. Even Armin Shimmerman said he shouldered the blame because of his performance, and believed he had severely damaged any prospect of the Ferengi becoming notable characters in Star Trek. Although, to be honest, I think Shimmerman is a little bit too hard on himself. Despite the overwhelming negative reception, the writers tried again with the Ferengi numerous times, making their first reappearance in The Battle. In an attempt to tone down the goofiness, Frank Corsentino, who played Damon Bok, was directed to tone down his portrayal to try and have the Ferengi be treated more seriously. While there's still no substitute for the Klingons or Romulans, the Ferengi were more successful in The Battle, with director Rob Bowman stating his fondness for them in later interviews. Subsequent appearances in episodes like The Price and Captain's Holiday would start to shift the way the Ferengi were used. Instead of being used as new villains to live up to the Klingons, the Ferengi became more like con artists and swindlers, Gene Roddenberry calling them the robber barons of the future. While they had utterly failed as mainstay villains, the stage was set for the Ferengi to drastically improve in my personal favourite Star Trek show, Deep Space Nine. Armin Shimmerman returned once again to portray the Ferengi character Quark, who was part of the main cast for Deep Space Nine. Having returned in TNG to play Braktor in the episode Peak Performance, he was well liked by the production team, even if he himself wasn't fond of his Ferengi performances at the time. Joining him in a kind of Ferengi ensemble were Max Grodenchik as Quark's brother Rom, and the late Aaron Eisenberg as Quark's nephew Nog. And it was on Deep Space Nine the Ferengi became more successful. Initially, Quark maintained a kind of antagonistic role, but of the scheming, conning variety, which had been established in TNG. However, as the seasons went on, Quark was treated as less of an antagonist, but more of a valued supporting player who could even be likable in certain circumstances. This was in large part due to the twisted but often endearing family relationships Quark had with his brother and nephew. Shimmerman, Grodenchik and Eisenberg spoke about a sense of camaraderie between themselves and other guest stars who played Ferengi characters. Episodes such as House of Quark, Rules of Acquisition, Family Business and Bar Association often showed the Ferengi as comedic characters, but also developed the characters in compelling and enjoyable ways. These episodes also cemented the ultra-capitalist form of society the Ferengi live in, creating the Rules of Acquisition as a kind of holy text. Funnily enough, due to their capitalistic leanings, the writers came to view the Ferengi as stand-ins for modern-day humans living inside the Star Trek universe. This mindset often allowed them to poke fun at capitalist ideals, but also examine Federation ideology by contrast. Some of my favourite scenes in DS9 are of Quark's observations of the Federation, such as his musings about what happens when humans lose their creature comforts, and of course the famous root beer scene between Quark and Garak. While not every Ferengi-focused episode is a success, the episode Prophet and Lace being one of my least favourites, at times they are an absolute riot. Easily my favourite Ferengi episode is The Magnificent Ferengi, which is simply endless amounts of fun. Not only do we get our usual ensemble of Ferengi, but also terrific guest stars, including the legendary Jeffrey Combs as Liquidator Brunt. Hell, even Iggy Pop is in this episode. Not only is the episode loads of fun with all the cast on top form, but it also showcases the strengths of the Ferengi as a species and as part of the Star Trek universe. As Quark points out, they aren't known as fierce warriors, but their quick thinking and expert negotiation skills is more than enough to get them out of desperate situations when need be. By the end of Deep Space Nine, the Ferengi had more than redeemed themselves. While many fans were still divided on them, Quark and co were a valued part of the excellent ensemble cast in Deep Space Nine. It wasn't long until Shimmerman believed he had redeemed himself. But again, I think the guy was a bit hard on himself. In general, however, the majority of Ferengi-centric episodes of DS9 are quite enjoyable, and Shimmerman, Grodenchik and Eisenberg gave brilliant performances across the board. Outside of DS9, the Ferengi appeared in Star Trek Voyager in a story originally intended to be featured in TNG, depicting two Ferengi using advanced technology to fool the populace into believing they're gods. It's an entertaining enough episode, but I'd say the more notable appearance was in Enterprise. Being set long before TNG and with the last outpost supposedly being the Federation's first real contact with the Ferengi, Enterprise's Season 2 outing Acquisition is a bit of a continuity error. The writers of the episode reasoned that the Enterprise crew never really found out the name of the species, but honestly it's not a huge deal for me personally. I don't think anyone should really be getting bent out of shape that this episode ruins the legacy of The Last Outpost, although apparently Brannon Braga hated their inclusion despite the fact that he himself has a story credit on the episode, so What I do think is quite cool about this episode though is just how much of it's conveyed visually, with the Ferengi speaking in their native language for much of the episode, but without subtitles. The language was developed by writers of the episode Maria and Andrei Jackmenton. It's not a working, constructed language the same way Klingon is, but it's still pretty fun. The episode also features some great guest performances from Star Trek Voyager's Ethan Phillips, Clint Howard, and once again Jeffrey Combs. The episode is nothing special, but it's a harmless bit of fun. Outside of canon, the Ferengi are given an interesting mention in the novel The Buried Age by Christopher L. Bennett. It attempts to reconcile the differing depictions between the Ferengi in their first appearance and what they later became. The explanation is that following the battle with the USS Stargazer, commanded by Jean-Luc Picard, the Grand Nagus of the Ferengi wanted to make the Ferengi Alliance appear dangerous and tough so the Federation would think twice about dealing with them. Thus the Nagus commissioned a campaign of misinformation to portray the Ferengi in a more threatening way. It's an interesting idea and does sound like something the Ferengi would do, but in general, I don't really go in for this sort of canon reconciliation, especially in Star Trek where canon has always been pretty silly. So there we have it for the Ferengi, a failed recurring villain transformed into a fun and unique part of the Star Trek universe, which has given us some of the best recurring guest performances in the franchise. They may not be as cool as the Klingons or nuanced as the Romulans, but they're an enjoyable part of Star Trek, which I'll be happy to see return someday. Lamagin Wagons, no idea, asks, what are your thoughts on the upcoming Battlestar Galactica show? This is a question I've actually answered before. In a previous video of mine, I gave my pitch for a hypothetical BSG movie which was in development at the time. However, this new show from the creator of Mr. Robot has me pretty interested. I'll give more detailed thoughts when we know more about that show, but in general, I'm keen to see what this ends up becoming, especially considering it's apparently going to take place within Ronald D. Moore's rebooted Battlestar Galactica universe, so I'm really interested in that. Rob Kemp asks, what's your favourite non-Star Trek ship design? Oof, that's certainly a tough one. There's like a million examples to choose from. If you're talking hero ships, I made a whole video about that. I love the Battlestar Galactica, I love the Normandy SR-2, the Andromeda Ascendant, there's just so many. One which did spring to mind recently is the NSEA Protector from Galaxy Quest. That's just such a cool hero ship design. I mean, I'd watch a show with that ship. But if you're talking bad guy ships, I really like the various Star Destroyers, especially the Resurgent class Star Destroyer from the First Order. But yeah, there's just loads, I couldn't pick a single one. Thanks for watching. If you like what I do and want to see more videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all my new uploads. If you like what I do and want to help the channel grow, join me over on my Patreon where you can see videos like this early. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.